Hey guys, my name is Faraz. I'm a second year medical student at the University of Cambridge. If you're coming back to the channel, welcome back. And if you're not already subscribed, make sure that you're subscribed. I've got a lot more tips and videos coming for the applicants of this year. So in this video, I'm going to give you my ultimate guide to BMAT Section 1 and hopefully give you a lot of pointers that make Section 1 that much more easier for you. Right, so let's start off with Section 1 problem solving. So in terms of practice for Section 1 problem solving, your two main resources are the BMAT Section 1 official past papers and the Oxford TSA past papers, which have slightly easier problem solving style questions. So I'm going to go through each type of problem solving question and give you a couple quick tips for each type. So the first type of question that comes up is the table type questions. This is the type of question where you're given a large table and usually asked to do a calculation with the data. So I have two main tips here. First of all is to be very careful to recognize what the question is actually asking you. So for example, some questions may be much quicker to do using the column of the table that has percentages as opposed to the column of the table that has absolute numbers. So make sure that you use the table to your advantage to take the shortest route to the correct answer. The other thing to be very careful of is the units in the headings of the table. So for example, one thing you see a lot with population tables, so this is tables about populations in different locations, is that the units might be in thousands or tens of thousands. So if you miss that, you can really mess up the question. Right, so the next question type is geometry style questions. So this is anything where you're thinking about how a die will look once it's been rolled, or where you're having to fold a net in your head. Now, if you're good at spatial awareness, you can probably just do these in your mind. But I have a tip for you if you struggle with it, as I did. And that's to bring a cuboidal rubber a cuboidal rubber into the exam. And you can use this rubber to visualize any six-sided object that's in the form of a cuboid or a cube. Or alternatively, you can use scrap paper, rip it up, and use it to actually physically fold the net in front of you. So it's basically a good way of brute forcing the question, but I'd recommend doing this at the end when you have a bit more time on your hands. Now the next type of question is fraction style questions, and I also have two main tips here. So first of all, it's to use fractions wherever possible, since it's a lot easier to compare numbers when they're in the form of fractions. The next thing I'd say to make sure of is if you're comparing two different things, like for example, let's say you're comparing two different holiday packages. What I would say is make sure you lay out your working very neatly. So for example, down the middle of a page, draw a ruled line and do each set of working separately so you can trace back your working and see how you came to the answer you got when you're checking through. Another question type is the longer arithmetic style questions. So for example, this could be questions about baking proportions or just adding up and subtracting lots of numbers. And my main tips here are first of all, to round sensibly. So use the answer options as a guide to how much you can round. For example, if the answer options are something like 90,000, 200,000 and 300,000, you can more than safely round to the nearest 10,000. But if the answer options are very close to each other, you probably need to be a bit more exact. Another tip I have is to use subtraction as a time-saving tool. So for example, instead of finding totals, sometimes you can subtract a number from a number that's given in the question to find what's remaining, and that's much quicker. And my last tip is to remember that BMAT maths is supposed to be simple. So if you're finding yourself doing very long-winded and complicated calculations, it's more than likely you've made a mistake somewhere before. So I'd recommend going back over your working. Now, another type of question is the BMAT graph style questions. Now remember, the old big data analysis questions are no longer in your spec, but graph questions still are. And the main thing you want to do with graph questions is two things. First of all, recognize what the graph is actually showing. So for example, some graphs show changes and some graphs show absolute values. And you can really mess up a question if you don't notice this, and the answer options are often designed to trick you into messing this up. Another thing to be careful of, similar to tables, is the units. So a lot of the time on the vertical axis of graphs, you'll have tens of thousands or thousands. And if you miss this, you can really mess up the question. So that's my two main tips for graph. If you're looking for an online BMAT video course, head on over to sigmamed.co.uk. It's an online BMAT video course that teaches you the content you need to know, the exam technique you need to use, and goes over more than 30 worked examples to show you how exam technique is applied in the actual exam. It's made by me and my friend Hamza, both of us study at Cambridge, and it costs only £25, which as far as I can see is the most affordable BMAT video course on the market, and also, in my humble opinion, the best. So I would recommend any student who is sitting the BMAT next month to go to sigmamed.co.uk and buy the course. It is an investment into your future, and all of the students we've had so far on the course have been extremely satisfied and reported that it has significantly helped them with their BMAT preparation. So head on over to sigmamed.co.uk to buy your course and help you ace the BMAT like a Sigma. So now we're going to go over section 1, critical thinking. So these are the text-based style questions, and again, your resources are the official BMAT section 1 past papers and the Oxford Thinking Skills admissions papers. So I'm going to go through each question type and give you a couple quick tips and tricks. So first of all, you have conclusion style questions. Now conceptually, a conclusion is basically the main point, the main opinion given in a paragraph. And the easiest way to find the conclusion is to look for indicator words such as should, could, must, therefore, thus, hence. And in some passages it is a bit more difficult. Basically, look for the main opinion in the passage, and that's the conclusion. Now, the second type of question you have is assumptions. So now, to find the assumption, you first have to find the conclusion and the reason given that leads to the conclusion. Think of the assumption as the unwritten sentence that links the reason and the final conclusion. Now, in terms of answering BMAT questions, you'll have 5 options per question. Go through each potential assumption and do what I call the negation test. If, when you negate the assumption and put it between the reason and conclusion, it destroys the conclusion, then that's the assumption. So basically, the assumption is the sentence that could go between the reason and conclusion, that when you include it, it makes the conclusion completely true, and when you negate it, it makes the conclusion untrue. Right, so the next question type is evaluating the impact of additional evidence. So this is the question type where it's something along the lines of which of the following statements, if true, would most weaken the above argument. Now the way to think of this is, if you put the statement between the conclusion and the reason behind the conclusion, which one of them essentially is the worst assumption possible, i.e. which one of these statements absolutely destroys the conclusion. So yeah, that's how you do this type of question. Now the next type of question is flaws in arguments. Now, the BMAT examiners every year, they come up with new flaws and new things to throw at you. So this type of question isn't super easy to prepare for, but essentially it all boils down to 3 main types of flaws. First of all, you have overlooking alternative explanations. Second of all, you have projecting into the future. And third of all, you have correlation causation errors, which is basically when you assume that just because A and B coincide, it means that A caused B, which isn't necessarily true. Now, another type of question in section 1, thinking skills, critical thinking, is matching arguments. Now, in order to do these questions, I recommend you algebraify the argument. So that's basically where you make it into the form of if X then Y, if not X then B. And once you do that with the question, do that to each answer option and see which one matches. Now, the last question type is applying principles. And this is basically quite an instinctual thing. It's not something you can really explain. And it's something you pick up more by practice. But essentially it's when you look at the argument and you look at what is this argument reasoned upon and see which one of the statements matches the same type of line of thinking. You can't really explain it in words, it's more, you get used to it once you've done enough practice. So yeah, that's essentially my master guide to section 1. I hope that helps you, and don't forget to subscribe.